The Faroe or Faroe Islands, or simply the Faroes, are an archipelago in the North Atlantic Ocean and an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. The official language of the country is Faroese, which is closely related to and partially mutually intelligible with Icelandic. Located a similar distance from Iceland, Norway, and the United Kingdom, the islands have a total area of about 1,400 square kilometers with a population of 54,676 as of August 2023. The terrain is rugged, and the subpolar oceanic climate is windy, wet, cloudy, and cool. Despite the northerly climate, the temperatures are moderated by the Gulf Stream and average above freezing throughout the year, hovering around 12 degrees Celsius in summer and 5 degrees Celsius in winter. As a result of its northerly latitude and proximity to the Arctic Circle, the islands experience perpetual civil twilight during summer nights and very short winter days. The capital and largest city, Tórshavn, receives the fewest recorded hours of sunshine of any city in the world at only 840 per year. While archaeological evidence placing the first known habitation as early as the 4th century, Faeringa saga, and the writings of Dikul place initial Norse settlement in the early 9th century. As with the subsequent settlement of Iceland, the islands were mainly settled by Norwegians and Norse Gaels, who additionally brought thralls of Gaelic origin. Following the introduction of Christianity by Sigmundur Brestison, the islands came under Norwegian rule in the early 11th century. The Faroe Islands followed Norway's integration into the Kalmar Union in 1397, and came under de facto Danish rule following that union's dissolution in 1523. Following the introduction of Lutheranism in 1538, the usage of Faroese was banned in churches, schools, and state institutions, and disappeared from writing for more than 3 centuries. The islands were formally ceded to Denmark in 1814 by the Treaty of Kiel along with Greenland and Iceland, and the Lagting was subsequently replaced by a Danish judiciary. Following the re-establishment of an official Faroese orthography by Wenceslaus Ulricus Hammershaimb, the Faroese language conflict saw Danish being gradually displaced by Faroese as the language of the church, public education, and law in the first half of the 20th century. The islands were occupied by the British during the Second World War, who refrained from governing Faroese internal affairs, inspired by this period of relative self-government and the declaration of Iceland as a republic in 1944. The islands held a referendum in 1946 that resulted in a narrow majority for independence. The results were annulled by Christian X, and subsequent negotiations led to the Faroe Islands being granted home rule in 1948. While remaining part of the Kingdom of Denmark to this day, the Faroe Islands have extensive autonomy and control most areas apart from military defense, policing, justice and currency, with partial control over its foreign affairs. Because the Faroe Islands are not part of the same customs area as Denmark, they have an independent trade policy and are able to establish their own trade agreements with other states. The islands have an extensive bilateral free trade agreement with Iceland, known as the Høyvik Agreement. In the Nordic Council, they are represented as part of the Danish delegation. In certain sports, the Faroe Islands field their own national teams. They did not become a part of the European Economic Community in 1973, instead keeping autonomy over their own fishing waters. As a result, the Faroe Islands are not a part of the European Union today. The Lagting, albeit suspended between 1816 and 1852, holds a claim as one of the oldest continuously running parliaments in the world. One Faroe Islander, Niels Ryberg Finsen, has won the Nobel Prize. Due to their small population, the Faroe Islands resultingly hold the most Nobel laureates per capita. History. Archaeological studies from 2021 found evidence of settlement on the islands before the arrival of Norse settlers, uncovering burnt grains of domesticated barley and peat ash deposited in two phases, the first dated between the mid-4th and mid-6th centuries, and another between the late 6th and late 8th centuries. Researchers have also found sheep DNA in lake bed sediments dating to the year 500. Barley and sheep had to have been brought to the islands by humans, as Scandinavians did not begin using sails until about 750, it is unlikely they could have reached the Faroes before then, leading to the study concluding that the settlers were more likely to originate from Scotland or Ireland. These findings concur with historical accounts from the same period. Archaeologist Mike Church noted that Irish monk de Kuhl describes a group of islands north of Scotland of very similar character to the Faroe Islands in his work De Mentura Orbis Terrae. In this text, de Kuhl describes a group of small islands, nearly all of them separated by narrow stretches of water that were always deserted since the beginning of time and previously populated by Heremitae ex Nostra Scotia for almost 100 years before being displaced by the arrival of Norse pirates. Church argued that these were likely the eremitic Papar that had similarly resided in parts of Iceland and Scotland in the same period. Writers like Broger and Peter Andreas Munch had drawn the same connections from de Kuhl's writings, with the latter arguing that these Papar were also the ones to bring sheep to the islands. A 9th-century voyage tale concerning Irish Saint Brendan, one of de Kuhl's contemporaries, details him visiting an unnamed northern group of islands. This has also been argued to be referring to the Faroe Islands, though not nearly as conclusively. A number of toponyms around the islands refer to the Papar and the Irisish, such as Paparoker near Vestmanna and Paparskilsur near Sakesun. Vestmanna is itself short for Vestmannahovn. Tombstones in a churchyard on Skavoy display a possible Gaelic origin or influence. Old Norse-speaking settlers arrived in the early 9th century, and their Old West Norse dialect would later evolve into the modern Faroese language. A number of the settlers were Norse, Gaels who did not come directly from Scandinavia, but rather from Norse communities that spanned the Irish Sea, Northern Isles, and Outer Hebrides of Scotland, including the Shetland and Orkney Islands. These settlers also brought thralls of Gaelic origin with them, and this admixture is reflected today in the Faroese genetic makeup and a number of loanwords from Old Irish. A traditional name for the islands in Irish, Na Sigeri, possibly derives from Egeaskejar, a nickname given to island dwellers. According to Faerenga saga, many of the Norwegian settlers in particular were spurred by their disapproval of the monarchy of Harald Fairhair, whose rule was also seen as an inciting factor for the settlement of Iceland. The founding date of the Lagting is not historically documented, though the saga implies that it was a well-established institution by the middle of the 10th century, when a legal dispute between chieftains Havgrimur and Einar Suðuroyingur, resulting in the exile of Eldjarn Kamhatur, is recounted in detail. Christianity was introduced to the islands in the late 10th and early 11th centuries by chieftain Sigmundur Brestisson. Baptized as an adult by then King of Norway Olaf Tryggvason, his mission to introduce Christianity was part of a greater plan to seize the islands on behalf of the Norwegian crown. While Christianity arrived at the same time as in Iceland, the process was met with much more conflict and violence, and was defined particularly by Sigmundur's conflict with rival chieftain Trondur I Gotu, the latter of whom was converted under threat of decapitation. Although their conflict resulted in Sigmundur's murder, the islands fell firmly under Norwegian rule following Trondur's death in 1035. 14th century onwards. While the Faroe Islands formally remained a Norwegian possession until 1814, Norway's merger into the Kalmar Union in 1397 gradually resulted in the islands coming under de facto Danish control. When the Protestant Reformation reached the Faroe Islands in 1538, the Faroese language was also outlawed in schools, churches, and official documentation, thus Faroese remained exclusively a spoken language until the 19th century. Following the Napoleonic Wars, the union between Denmark and Norway was dissolved by the Treaty of Kiel in 1814, while Norway was transferred to the Swedish crown. Denmark retained possession of Norway's North Atlantic territories, which included the Faroe Islands along with Greenland and Iceland. Shortly afterwards, Denmark asserted control and began to restrict the islands' autonomy. In 1816, the Faroe Islands was reconstituted as a county within the Danish kingdom. The Lagting, having operated continuously for almost a millennium, was dissolved and replaced by a Danish judiciary, and the post of Lagmor was likewise replaced by a Danish-appointed amtmand. As part of its mercantilist economic policy, Denmark maintained a monopoly over trade with the Faroe Islands and forbade the Faroese from trading with other countries. The trade monopoly in the Faroe Islands was eventually abolished in 1856, after which the area developed into a modern fishing-based economy with its own fishing fleet. In 1846, the Faroe Islands finally regained formal political representation when they were allocated 2 seats in the Danish Riksdag. The Lagting itself was reinstated as an advisory body to the Amtmand in 1852. An official Faroese orthography was first introduced in 1846 by Lutheran minister Wenceslaus Ulricus Hammershaimb, returning the language to print after 300 years of only existing in oral form. With the return of written Faroese to the public sphere after more than 300 years, nationalism gained a foothold in Faroese society. The modern Faroese national movement is commonly agreed to have begun with the Christmas meeting of 1888, held to discuss how to defend the Faroese language and Faroese traditions. This meeting led to the rise of 2 of the movement's most prominent early figures, Jonas Patterson and Rasmus Efferso. It was initially exclusively concerned with the status of the Faroese language, but it soon gained a political dimension with the advent of the Faroese language conflict in the early 20th century. Both sides of the conflict were represented by the country's first ever political parties, the Union Party founded in 1906, which supported Faroese literature but opposed its usage in education, and the Self-Government Party, which sought to introduce Faroese as the official language in all public spheres and additionally demanded increased political autonomy for the islands. The Faroese language gradually won out. Laws and protocols of the Lagting were written in Faroese from 1927 onwards. Schools switched to Faroese as the language of instruction in 1938, and Faroese was fully authorized as the language of the church the following year. Finally, in 1944, Faroese gained equal status with Danish in legal proceedings. In the first year of the Second World War, on April 12, 1940, British troops occupied the Faroe Islands in Operation Valentine. Nazi Germany had invaded Denmark and commenced the invasion of Norway on April 9, 1940 under Operation Weserubung. In 1942 to 1943, the British Royal Engineers, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel William Law, built the first and only airport in the Faroe Islands, Vagar Airport. The British refrained from governing Faroese internal affairs, and the islands became effectively self-governing during the war. After the war ended and the British Army left, this period and Iceland's declaration as a republic in 1944 served as a precedent and a model in the mind of many Faroe Islanders. The Lagting held an independence referendum on September 14, 1946, resulting in a very narrow majority for independence. 50.73% voted in favor and 49.27% against. The margin was only 161 votes. The Lagting subsequently declared independence on September 18, 1946. This declaration was annulled by Denmark on September 20, arguing that the number of invalid votes being greater than the narrow margin in favor made the result invalid. As a result, King Christian X of Denmark ordered that the Faroese Lagting be dissolved on September 24, with new elections held that November. The Faroese parliamentary election of 1946 resulted in a majority for parties opposed to independence. Following protracted negotiations, Denmark granted home rule to the Faroe Islands on March 30, 1948. This agreement granted the islands a high degree of autonomy, and Faroese finally became the official language in all public spheres. In 1973 the Faroe Islands declined to join Denmark in entering the European Economic Community. As a result, the islands are not part of the European Union today. Following the collapse of the fishing industry in the early 1990s, the Faroes experienced considerable economic difficulties. Geography. The Faroe Islands are an island group consisting of 18 major islands and a total of 779 islands, islets, and skerries about 655 kilometers off the coast of northern Europe, between the Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean, about halfway between Iceland and Norway, the closest neighbors being the Northern Isles and the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. The islands cover an area of 1,399 square kilometers and have small lakes and rivers, but no major ones. There are 1,117 kilometers of coastline. The only significant uninhabited island is Lilla-Dimmun. The islands are rugged and rocky with some low peaks. The coasts are mostly cliffs. The highest point is Slayataratindur in northern Eysturoy, 882 meters above sea level. The Faroe Islands are made up of an approximately 6 kilometers thick succession of mostly basaltic lava that was part of the Great North Atlantic Igneous Province during the Paleogene period. The lavas were erupted during the opening of the North Atlantic Ocean, which began about 60 million years ago, and what is today the Faroe Islands was then attached to Greenland. The lavas are underlain by circa 30 kilometers of unidentified ancient continental crust. Government and politics. The Faroe Islands are a self-governing country under the external sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark. The Faroese government holds executive power in local government affairs. The head of the government is called the Lagmor and serves as Prime Minister and head of the Faroese government. Any other member of the cabinet is called a minister of the Faroese government. The Faroese parliament, the Lagting, dates back to the early days of settlement and claims to be one of the longest functioning parliaments in the world, alongside the Icelandic Althing and the Manx Tinwald. The parliament currently has 33 members. Elections are held at municipal and national levels, additionally electing 2 members to the Folketing. Until 2007, there were 7 electoral districts, which were abolished on October 25 of that year in favor of a single nationwide district. There are also the 6 traditional Sysler, Noroyar, Eysturoy, Streymoy, Vagar, Sandoy, and Suðuroy. While no longer of any legal significance, the term is still commonly used to indicate a geographical region. In earlier times, each Sysla had its own assembly, the so-called Varding. Relationship with Denmark. The Faroe Islands have been under Norwegian-Danish control since 1388. The 1814 Treaty of Kiel terminated the Danish-Norwegian Union, and Norway came under the rule of the King of Sweden, while the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland remained Danish possessions. From ancient times the Faroe Islands had a parliament, which was abolished in 1816, and the Faroe Islands were to be governed as an ordinary Danish amt, with the Amtmand as its head of government. In 1851, the Lagting was reinstated, but, until 1948, served mainly as an advisory body. The islands are home to a notable independence movement that has seen an increase in popular support within recent decades. At the end of World War II, some of the population favored independence from Denmark, and on September 14, 1946, an independence referendum was held on the question of secession. It was a consultative referendum, the parliament not being bound to follow the people's vote. This was the first time that the Faroese people had been asked whether they favored independence or wanted to continue within the Danish kingdom. The result of the vote was only a slight majority in favor of secession. The Speaker of the Lagting, together with the majority, initiated the process of becoming an independent state. The minority of the Lagting left in protest, regarding these actions as illegal. One parliament member, Jakob I. Jakobstavio, was shunned by his own party, the Social Democratic Party, for having joined the majority of the Lagting. The Speaker of the Lagting declared the Faroe Islands independent on September 18, 1946. On September 25, 1946, a Danish prefect announced to the Lagting that the king, rejecting the majority vote, had dissolved the parliament and ordered new elections. A parliamentary election was held a few months later, in which the political parties that favored remaining in the Danish kingdom increased their share of the vote and formed a coalition. Based on this, they chose to reject secession. Instead, a compromise was reached and the Folketing passed a home rule law that went into effect in 1948. The Faroe Islands' status as a Danish AMT was thereby brought to an end. The Faroe Islands were given a high degree of self-governance, supported by a financial subsidy from Denmark to recompense expenses the islands have on Danish services. In protest against the new Home Rule Act, Republic was founded. As of 2021, the islanders were evenly split between those favoring independence and those who prefer to continue as a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Within both camps there is a wide range of opinions. Of those who favor independence, some are in favor of an immediate unilateral declaration of independence. Others see independence as something to be attained gradually and with the full consent of the Danish government and the Danish nation. In the Unionist camp, there are also many who foresee and welcome a gradual increase in autonomy even while strong ties with Denmark are maintained. 2 attempts have been made to draft a separate Faroese constitution. The first time was in 2011, when the then Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen denounced it as incompatible with Denmark's constitution, stating that if the Faroe Islands wished to continue with the move, they must declare independence. A second attempt was made in 2015, facing similar criticisms before eventually being withdrawn without a vote. Relationship with the European Union. As explicitly asserted by both treaties of the European Union, the Faroe Islands are not part of the European Union. The Faroes are not grouped with the EU when it comes to international trade. For instance, when the EU and Russia imposed reciprocal trade sanctions on each other over the war in Donbas in 2014, the Faroes began exporting significant amounts of fresh salmon to Russia. Moreover, a protocol to the Treaty of Accession of Denmark to the European Communities stipulates that Danish nationals residing in the Faroe Islands are not considered Danish nationals within the meaning of the treaties. Hence, Danish people living in the Faroes are not citizens of the European Union. The Faroes are not covered by the Schengen Agreement, but there are no border checks when traveling between the Faroes and any Schengen country. Relationship with international organizations. The Faroe Islands are not fully independent, but they do have political relations directly with other countries through agreement with Denmark. The Faroe Islands are a member of some international organizations as though they were an independent country. The Faroes have associate membership in the Nordic Council but have expressed wishes for full membership. The Faroe Islands are a member of several international sports federations like UEFA, FIFA in football and FINA in swimming and EHF in handball and have their own national teams. They also have their own telephone country code, +298, internet country code top-level domain, .fo, banking code FO and postal code system. The Faroe Islands make their own agreements with other countries regarding trade and commerce. When the European Union imposed sanctions against the Russian Federation in 2014, the Faroe Islands were not a part of the embargo because they are not a part of EU, and the islands had just themselves experienced a year of embargo from the EU including Denmark against the islands. The Faroese Prime Minister Kai Leo Johannessen went to Moscow to negotiate the trade between Russia and the Faroe Islands. The Faroese Minister of Fisheries negotiates with the EU and other countries regarding the rights to fish. In mid-2005, representatives of the Faroe Islands raised the possibility of their territory joining the European Free Trade Association. According to Article 56 of the EFTA Convention, only states may become members of the EFTA. The Faroes are an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, and not a sovereign state in their own right. Consequently, they considered the possibility that the Kingdom of Denmark in respect of the Faroes could join the EFTA, though the Danish government has stated that this mechanism would not allow the Faroes to become a separate member of the EEA because Denmark was already a party to the EEA agreement. The government of Denmark officially supports new membership of the EFTA with effect for the Faroe Islands. Language. As stipulated in Section 11 in the 1948 Home Rule Act, Faroese is the primary and official language of the country, although Danish is taught in schools and can be used by the Faroese government in public relations, with public services providing Danish translations of documents on request. Faroese belongs to the North Germanic language branch and is descended from Old Norse, being most closely related to Icelandic. Due to its geographic isolation, it has preserved more conservative grammatical features that have been lost in Danish, Norwegian and Swedish. It is the only language alongside Icelandic and Elfdalian to preserve the letter D, though unlike the others, it is not pronounced. Faroese Sign Language was officially adopted as a national language in 2017. Religion. According to the Faerenga saga, Sigmundur Brestisson brought Christianity to the islands in 999. However, archaeology at a site in Toftanes, Leirvik, named Bonhustoften, and over a dozen slabs from Landsgurur in the small island of Skavoy which in the main display encircled linear and outline crosses, suggest that Celtic Christianity may have arrived at least 150 years earlier. The Faroe Islands Church Reformation was completed on January 1, 1540. According to official statistics from 2019, 80% of the Faroese population are members of the state church, the Church of the Faroe Islands, following a form of Lutheranism. The Folkekirkjan became an independent church in 2007, previously it had been a diocese within the Church of Denmark. Faroese members of the clergy who have had historical importance include Wenceslaus Ulricus Hammershaimb, Frederikur Petersen and, perhaps most significantly, Jakob Dahl, who had a great influence in ensuring that the Faroese language was spoken in the church instead of Danish. Participation in churches is more prevalent among the Faroese population than among most other Scandinavians. In the late 1820s, the Christian evangelical religious movement, the Plymouth Brethren, was established in England. In 1865, a member of this movement, William Gibson Sloane, travelled to the Faroes from Shetland. At the turn of the 20th century, the Faroese Plymouth Brethren numbered 30. Today, around 10% of the Faroese population are members of the Open Brethren community. About 3% belong to the charismatic movement. There are several charismatic churches around the islands, the largest of which, called Keldon, has about 200 to 300 members. About 2% belong to other Christian groups. The Adventists operate a private school in Tórshavn. Jehovah's Witnesses also have 4 congregations with a total of 121 members. The Roman Catholic congregation has about 270 members and falls under the jurisdiction of Denmark's Roman Catholic Diocese of Copenhagen. The municipality of Tórshavn has an old Franciscan school. Unlike Denmark, Sweden, and Iceland, the Faroes have no organized heathen community. The best-known church buildings in the Faroe Islands include Tórshavn Cathedral, Olav II of Norway's Church and the Magnus Cathedral in Kirkjubøur, the Vesterkirkjan and the St. Mary's Church, both of which are situated in Tórshavn, the Church of Famjin, the Octagonal Church in Haldersvik, Christianskirkjan in Klaksvik, and also the two pictured here. In 1948, Victor Danielson completed the first Bible translation into Faroese from different modern languages. Jacob Dahl and Christian Osvald Videro completed the second translation in 1961. The latter was translated from the original biblical languages into Faroese. According to the 2011 census, there were 33,018 Christians, 23 Muslims, 7 Hindus, 66 Buddhists, 12 Jews, 13 Baha'is, 3 Sikhs, 149 others, 85 with more than one belief, and 1,397 with no religion. Education. The levels of education in the Faroe Islands are primary, secondary, and higher education. Most institutions are funded by the state. There are few private schools in the Faroe Islands. Education is compulsory for 9 years between the ages of 7 and 16. Compulsory education consists of 7 years of primary education and 2 years of lower secondary education. It is public, free of charge, provided by the respective municipalities, and is called the Folkeskole in Faroese. The Folkeskole also provides optional preschool education as well as the 10th year of education that is a prerequisite to getting admitted to upper secondary education. Students that complete compulsory education are allowed to continue education in a vocational school, where they can have job-specific training and education. Since the fishing industry is an important part of Faroe Islands' economy, maritime schools are an important part of Faroese education. Upon completion of the 10th year of Folkeskole, students can continue to upper secondary education, which consists of several different types of schools. Higher education is offered at the University of the Faroe Islands. A part of Faroese youth moves abroad to pursue higher education, mainly in Denmark. Other forms of education comprise adult education and music schools. The structure of the Faroese educational system bears resemblances with its Danish counterpart. In the 12th century, education was provided by the Catholic Church in the Faroe Islands. The Church of Denmark took over education after the Protestant Reformation. Modern educational institutions started operating in the last quarter of the 19th century and developed throughout the 20th century. The status of the Faroese language in education was a significant issue for decades, until it was accepted as a language of instruction in 1938. Initially, education was administered and regulated by Denmark. In 1979, responsibilities on educational issues started transferring to the Faroese authorities, a procedure which was completed in 2002. The Ministry of Education, Research, and Culture has the jurisdiction of educational responsibility in the Faroe Islands. Since the Faroe Islands is a part of the Danish realm, education in the Faroe Islands is influenced and has similarities with the Danish educational system. There is an agreement on educational cooperation between the Faroe Islands and Denmark. In 2012, the public spending on education was 8% of GDP. The municipalities are responsible for the school buildings for children's education in Folkeskolen from age 1st grade to 9th or 10th grade. In November 2013, 1,615 people, or 7% of the total number of employees, were employed in the education sector. Of the 31,270 people aged 25 and above, 1,717 have gained at least a master's degrees or a PhD, 8,428 have gained a bachelor's of science or a diploma, 11,706 have finished upper secondary education, while 9,419 has only finished primary school and have no other education. There is no data on literacy in the Faroe Islands, but the CIA Factbook states that it is probably as high as in Denmark proper. The majority of students in upper secondary schools are women, although men represent the majority in higher education institutions. In addition, most young Faroese people who relocate to other countries to study are women. Out of 8,535 holders of bachelor degrees, 4,796 have had their education in the Faroe Islands, 2,724 in Denmark, 543 in both the Faroe Islands and Denmark, 94 in Norway, 80 in the United Kingdom, and the rest in other countries. Economy. Economic troubles caused by a collapse of the Faroese fishing industry in the early 1990s brought high unemployment rates of 10 to 15% by the mid-1990s. Unemployment decreased in the later 1990s, down to about 6% at the end of 1998. By June 2008, unemployment had declined to 1.1%, before rising to 3.4% in early 2009. In December 2019, the unemployment reached a record low 0.9%. Nevertheless, the almost total dependence on fishing and fish farming means that the economy remains vulnerable. The biggest private companies of the Faroe Islands is the salmon farming company Bakkafrost, which is the largest of the 4 salmon farming companies in the Faroe Islands and the third biggest in the world. In 2011, 13% of the Faroe Islands' national income consists of economic aid from Denmark, corresponding to roughly 5% of GDP. Since 2000, the government has fostered new information technology and business projects to attract new investment. The introduction of Burger King in Tórshavn was widely publicized as a sign of the globalization of Faroese culture. It remains to be seen whether these projects will succeed in broadening the island's economic base. The islands have one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe, but this should not necessarily be taken as a sign of a recovering economy, as many young students move to Denmark and other countries after leaving high school. This leaves a largely middle-aged and elderly population that may lack the skills and knowledge to fill newly developed positions on the Faroes. Nonetheless, in 2008 the Faroes were able to make a $52 million loan to Iceland in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. Transport. By road, the main islands are connected by bridges and tunnels. Government-owned Strandfaraskiplandsins provides public bus and ferry service to the main towns and villages. There are no railways. By air, Scandinavian Airlines and the government-owned Atlantic Airways both have scheduled international flights to Vágar Airport, the island's only airport. Atlantic Airways also provides helicopter service to each of the islands. All civil aviation matters are controlled from the Civil Aviation Administration Denmark. By sea, Smyril Line operates a regular international passenger, car, and freight service linking the Faroe Islands with Seyðisfjörður, Iceland and Hirtshals, Denmark. The Faroes have a highly developed road network connecting almost all settlements by tunnels through the mountains and between the islands, bridges, and causeways that link together the 4 largest islands and 3 islands to the northeast. Suðuroy is the only major island not connected by a fixed link. Kolter and Stora Dimon have no ferry connection, only a helicopter service. Other small islands Mykines to the west, Kalsoy, Svínoy and Fugloy to the north, Hester west of Streymoy, and Nólsoy east of Tórshavn have smaller ferries, and some of these islands also have a helicopter service. Since 2014, the Faroese government has placed emphasis on expanding fixed road connections between islands. In 2020 the Eysturoyartunnelen opened, greatly reducing travel time between Eysturoy and Tórshavn. In 2023, the Faroes' longest single-length tunnel opened, Sandoyartunnelen, linking Sandoy to the Greater Faroese road network on Streymoy. Culture. The culture of the Faroe Islands has its roots in the Nordic culture. The Faroe Islands were long isolated from the main cultural phases and movements that swept across parts of Europe. This means that they have maintained a great part of their traditional culture. The language spoken is Faroese, which is one of three insular North Germanic languages descended from the Old Norse language spoken in Scandinavia in the Viking Age, the others being Icelandic and the extinct Norn, which is thought to have been mutually intelligible with Faroese. Until the 15th century, Faroese had a similar orthography to Icelandic and Norwegian, but after the Reformation in 1538, the ruling Norwegians outlawed its use in schools, churches, and official documents. Although a rich spoken tradition survived, for 300 years the language was not written down. This means that all poems and stories were handed down orally. Traditional food. Traditional Faroese food is mainly based on meat, seafood, and potatoes and uses few fresh vegetables. Mutton of the Faroe sheep is the basis of many meals, and one of the most popular treats is skerpikjot, well-aged, wind-dried, quite chewy mutton. The drying shed, known as a hjallar, is a standard feature in many Faroese homes, particularly in small towns and villages. Other traditional foods are semi-dried mutton and matured fish. Another Faroese specialty is tivistogspik, made from pilot whale meat and blubber. The tradition of consuming meat and blubber from pilot whales arises from the fact that a single kill can provide many meals. Fresh fish also features strongly in the traditional local diet, as do seabirds, such as Faroese puffins, and their eggs. Dried fish is also commonly eaten. There are two breweries in the Faroe Islands. Faroe has produced beer since 1888 with exports mainly to Iceland and Denmark. Okara Bryggeri was founded in 2010. A local specialty is Frederick, a special brew made in Nolsoy. Since the friendly British occupation, the Faroese have been fond of British food, in particular British-style chocolate such as Cadbury Dairy Milk, which is found in many of the island's shops. Sports. The Faroe Islands have competed in every biennial island games since they were established in 1985. The games were hosted by the islands in 1989 and Faroes won the island games in 2009. Football is by far the biggest sports activity on the islands, with 7,000 registered players out of the whole population of 52,000. 10 football teams contest the Faroe Islands Premier League, currently ranked 39th by UEFA's league coefficient. The Faroe Islands are a full member of UEFA and the Faroe Islands national football team competes in the UEFA European Football Championship qualifiers. The Faroe Islands is also a full member of FIFA and therefore the Faroe Islands football team also competes in the FIFA World Cup qualifiers. The Faroe Islands won its first ever competitive match when the team defeated Austria 1-0 in a UEFA Euro 1992 qualifying. The nation's biggest success in football came in 2014 after defeating Greece 1-0, a result that was considered the biggest shock of all time in football thanks to a 169-place distance between the teams in the FIFA World Rankings when the match was played. The team climbed 82 places to 105 on the FIFA ranking after the 1-0 win against Greece. The team went on to defeat Greece again on June 13, 2015 by a score of 2-1. On July 9, 2015 the national football team of the Faroes climbed another 28 places up on the FIFA ranking. Recently, Faroe Islands achieved another famous victory by beating Turkey 2-1 in the 2022-23 UEFA Nations League C, although this shock win did not prevent Turkey from achieving promotion to League B. The Faroe Islands men's national handball team won the first two editions of the IHF Emerging Nations Championship, in 2015 and 2017. The team qualified for the 2024 European Men's Handball Championship in Germany, where they ranked 20th out of 24 teams after the draw with Norway and tight games with Slovenia and Poland. The Faroe Islands are a full member of FINA and compete under their own flag at World Championships, European Championships, and World Cup events. The Faroese swimmer Pál Joensen won a bronze medal at the 2012 FINA World Swimming Championships and 4 silver medals at the European Championships, all medals won in the men's longest and second longest distance, the 1500 and 800 meter freestyle, short and long course. The Faroe Islands also compete in the Paralympics and have won 1 gold, 7 silver, and 5 bronze medals since the 1984 Summer Paralympics. 2 Faroese athletes have competed at the Olympics, but under the Danish flag, since the Olympic Committee does not allow the Faroe Islands to compete under its own flag. The 2 Faroese who have competed are the swimmer Pál Joensen in 2012 and the rower Katrin Olsen. Olsen competed at the 2008 Summer Olympics in double sculler lightweight together with Julian Rasmussen, another Faroese rower, who is a member of the Danish national rowing team, is Sverre Sandberg Nielsen, who currently competes in single sculler, heavyweight. He has also competed in double sculler. He is the current Danish record holder in the men's indoor rowing, heavyweight. He broke a 9-year-old record in January 2015 and improved it in January 2016. He has also competed at the 2015 World Rowing Championships, making it to the semi-final. He competed at the 2015 World Rowing Championship under 23 and made it to the final, where he placed 4th. The Faroe Islands applied to the IOC for full membership in 1984. But as of 2017, the Faroe Islands are still not a member of the IOC. At the 2015 European Games in Baku, Azerbaijan, the Faroe Islands were not allowed to compete under the Faroese flag. They were, however, allowed to compete under the Ligue Européenne de Natation flag. Before this, the Faroese Prime Minister Kai Leo Holm Johannessen had a meeting with the IOC President Thomas Bach in Lausanne on May 21, 2015 to discuss Faroese membership in the IOC. Faroese people are very active in sports. They have domestic competitions in football, handball, volleyball, badminton, swimming, outdoor rowing and indoor rowing in rowing machines, horse riding, shooting, table tennis, judo, golf, tennis, archery, gymnastics, cycling, triathlon, running, and other competitions in athletics. During 2014, the Faroe Islands was given the opportunity to compete in the Electronic Sports European Championship in esports. 5 players, all of Faroese nationality, faced Slovenia in the first round, eventually getting knocked out with a 0-2 score. At the 2016 Baku Chess Olympiad, the Faroe Islands got their first chess grandmaster. Helgi Žižka won his 3rd GM norm, and thus won the title of chess grandmaster. The Faroe Islands was given another chance to compete internationally in esports, this time at the 2018 Northern European Minor Championship. The team captain was Roker Dam Norøy. Clothing. Faroese handicrafts are mainly based on materials available to local villages, mainly wool. Garments include sweaters, scarves, and gloves. Faroese jumpers have distinct Nordic patterns. Each village has some regional variations handed down from mother to daughter. There has recently been a strong revival of interest in Faroese knitting, with young people knitting and wearing updated versions of old patterns emphasized by strong colors and bold patterns. This appears to be a reaction to the loss of traditional lifestyles, and as a way to maintain and assert cultural tradition in a rapidly changing society. Many young people study and move abroad, and this helps them maintain cultural links with their specific Faroese heritage. There has also been a great interest in Faroese sweaters from the TV series The Killing, where the main actress wears Faroese sweaters. Lace knitting is a traditional handicraft. The most distinctive trait of Faroese lace shawls is the center-back gusset shaping. Each shawl consists of two triangular side panels, a trapezoid-shaped back gusset, an edge treatment, and usually shoulder shaping. These are worn by all generations of women, particularly as part of the traditional Faroese costume as an overgarment. The traditional Faroese national dress is also a local handicraft that people spend a lot of time, money, and effort to assemble. It is worn at weddings and traditional dancing events, and on feast days. The cultural significance of the garment should not be underestimated, both as an expression of local and national identity and a passing on and reinforcing of traditional skills that bind local communities together. A young Faroese person is normally handed down a set of children's Faroese clothes that have passed from generation to generation. Children are confirmed at age 14, and normally start to collect the pieces to make an adult outfit, which is considered as a rite of passage. Traditionally, the aim would have been to complete the outfit by the time a young person was ready to marry and wear the clothes at the ceremony, though it is mainly only men who do this now. Each piece is intricately hand-knitted, dyed, woven or embroidered to the specifications of the wearer. For example, the man's waistcoat is put together by hand in bright blue, red or black fine wool. The front is then intricately embroidered with colorful silk threads, often by a female relative. The motifs are often local Faroese flowers or herbs. After this, a row of Faroese-made solid silver buttons are sewn on the outfit. Women wear embroidered silk, cotton, or wool shawls and pinafores that can take months to weave or embroider with local flora and fauna. They are also adorned with a hand-woven black and red ankle-length skirt, knitted black and red jumper, a velvet belt, and black 18th-century style shoes with silver buckles. The outfit is held together by a row of solid silver buttons, silver chains, and locally made silver brooches and belt buckles, often fashioned with Viking-style motifs. Both men's and women's national dress are extremely costly and can take many years to assemble. Women in the family often work together to assemble the outfits, including knitting the close-fitting jumpers, weaving and embroidering, sewing and assembling the national dress. This tradition binds together families, passes on traditional crafts, and reinforces the Faroese culture of traditional village life in the context of a modern society. Public holidays. Olavsoka is on July 29. It commemorates the death of Saint Olaf. The celebrations are held in Torshavn, starting on the evening of the 28th and continuing until the 31st. July 28 is a half-working day for the members of some of the labor unions, while St. Olaf's Day on July 29 is a full holiday for most but not all union members. The official celebration starts on the 29th, with the opening of the Faroese Parliament, a custom that dates back 900 years. This begins with a service held in Torshavn Cathedral. All members of parliament as well as civil and church officials walk to the cathedral in a procession. All of the parish ministers take turns giving the sermon. After the service, the procession returns to the parliament for the opening ceremony. Other celebrations are marked by different kinds of sports competitions, the rowing competition being the most popular, art exhibitions, pop concerts, and the famous Faroese dance in Shnlikersi and on Vagli outdoor singing on July 29 continuing after midnight on July 30. The celebrations have many facets, and only a few are mentioned here. Many people also mark the occasion by wearing the national Faroese dress.